Hey, you! Get on the ground now! You're under arrest for a stolen vehicle!
What
you
the
want
hell
to
are you
resist?
talking about? I didn't steal anything!
Shut up and get on the ground!
This is my car, you idiot! What's your damn problem?
I said down! Hands behind
I'm
your
not
back
going
right
anywhere,
now.
man! Check the plates, it's mine!
Don't play games with me!
You're out of
Down.
line! Let go of me!
Down! Right now!
The scene erupts as Officer Daniel Cross charges toward Marcus Hill, a respected judge, standing calmly outside his car. The sun beats down, casting long shadows, but there's no warmth in the exchange. Cross storms in, his voice slicing through the air like a knife. Hey you, get on the ground now. The command is aggressive, unprovoked, the tone shrill with authority. Marcus, caught completely off guard, stares back in confusion, not understanding what's happening. His voice cracks through the tension. What the hell are you talking about? I didn't steal anything. Cross's face twists with frustration, his jaw tightening. You're under arrest for a stolen vehicle. You want to resist? The words hit like a slap. Harsh, unfounded. Marcus takes a step back, but the officer moves in closer, chest heaving, eyes locked onto his target. Marcus's confusion turns into disbelief. He's been a pillar of his community for years, a judge with a spotless record, and now here he is, being accused of a crime he didn't commit. This is my car, you idiot. What's your damn problem? His voice booms, but it only seems to fuel Cross's rage. Without warning, Cross shoves him toward the car. Shut up and get on the ground. The officer's hands are forceful, shoving, grabbing, pushing Marcus toward submission. The fisheye lens of the second officer's bodycam captures every detail, every shout, every step. The escalation, the aggression, the lack of reason. Marcus stands his ground, but the officer doesn't back down. The intensity of the moment is palpable, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. The camera shakes slightly as Officer Cross barrels forward, pushing Marcus against the car. His words are fast and clipped, drowning out everything else. Move. Now. You're not going anywhere. The fisheye lens distorts the faces, making everything feel surreal, yet painfully real. What's happening here? Why is a judge, a man who has devoted his life to justice, being treated this way? This is more than just a mistake. It's a violation of something deeper. The shouting continues, rising louder, angrier. Marcus has no idea how he got here, but this is the moment everything changes. Marcus Hill had spent his life enforcing the law, not breaking it. A seasoned judge, with over 15 years of experience on the bench, Marcus was a beacon of professionalism, a man who embodied the very principles of justice. He was known for his calm demeanor, his sharp mind, and his unwavering commitment to fairness. This was a man who had spent his career ensuring the rights of others were protected, a man who had sent countless criminals to prison for breaking the law. But in this moment, Marcus wasn't a judge. He was just a man caught in the crossfire of a situation he didn't understand. His mind raced, but he kept his composure. After all, he was trained for moments of high pressure, courtroom drama, heated exchanges, complex legal arguments. Yet, nothing could have prepared him for this. Standing outside his car, a car he had owned for years, Marcus felt the sharp sting of betrayal. He had always followed the law. He'd served his community with honor, upholding the very principles that made the justice system work. He had been a public defender, an advocate for the voiceless, before ascending to the bench. He had worked tirelessly to ensure that justice was not only done, but seen to be done. So, when Officer Cross, with his aggressive tone and disregard for reason, demanded he get on the ground, Marcus was taken aback. What's this about? My car? There's been a mistake, Marcus said, his voice steady but laced with confusion. But the officer didn't seem interested in explanations, much less apologies. Instead, Officer Cross's voice grew louder, more insistent. You're under arrest for a stolen vehicle. For a moment, Marcus thought he had heard wrong. A stolen vehicle? His vehicle? The same car he had bought years ago, maintained meticulously, and drove without incident. Marcus Hill wasn't just a judge. He was a father, a husband, a community leader. He was respected by his peers, trusted by those who came before him in the courtroom. People who had seen him preside over cases where lives hung in the balance, knew that Marcus was a man of integrity, someone who wouldn't bend the law or his own principles. His track record was spotless. He had never been involved in any criminal activity, not even close. He was the picture of professionalism. In that moment, though, none of that mattered. Officer Cross was shouting, pulling him toward the car, ignoring Marcus's repeated attempts to clarify the situation. "This is my car, officer. You have the wrong person." The words seemed to bounce off the officer's anger like a rock skipping across water. The more Marcus tried to explain, the more Cross seemed to push him, tighten his grip, escalate the situation. And that's when the violation hit him. It wasn't just the arrest. It wasn't just the shouting. It was the utter disregard for his rights. It was the treatment of a man who had spent his life ensuring justice was done, only to be thrown into a system that seemed to have forgotten about fairness and reason. It was a violation of his person, of his rights as a citizen, and it was personal. In that moment, Marcus wasn't a judge. He was a black man, accused of something he didn't do, subjected to a system that failed to recognize the dignity he deserved. The car he had bought with his own money, worked for, and maintained meticulously was now the reason for this nightmare. All of his years of experience in the courtroom, all the years spent enforcing the law, now seemed irrelevant in the face of this overwhelming force. "I am not resisting," Marcus repeated, his voice steady but firm. "I'm trying to understand what's going on here." But Officer Cross wasn't listening. The shouting continued, the threats grew louder, and Marcus found himself pushed against the car, handcuffed, with no explanation other than the accusation of a stolen vehicle. There was no apology, no clarification, no attempt to explain the mistake. It felt like the world had tilted on its axis, and Marcus Hill, a respected judge, had become a victim of an unchecked system. The second officer's fisheye lens captured the entire ordeal, the aggressive handling, the force used, the disregard for Marcus's attempts to explain. The footage would become the evidence of a violation of rights, the footage that would ultimately reveal the truth. But at this moment, all Marcus Hill knew was that he was being treated like a criminal, despite everything he had done in his life to uphold the law. And in this moment, Marcus's mind wasn't on his career or his future. It was on the simple, painful realization that despite his title, despite his years of service, his rights were being trampled. This was personal. This was a violation, not just of the law, but of everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in. This wasn't just an arrest. This was a man who had fought for justice, now facing the brutal reality of how the system can turn on you when least expected. The sound of the cuffs clicking shut was deafening. But Marcus held his head high, despite the humiliation, despite the injustice. Because if there was one thing he knew, it was that the truth would come out. The situation that led to Marcus Hill's arrest started with a single, erroneous report, a call that claimed a vehicle had been stolen in the area. On paper, it seemed straightforward, a stolen car, a quick response by law enforcement. But what no one realized was that this was a case of mistaken identity, a mix-up that would escalate into one of the most humiliating experiences of Marcus Hill's life. When the police arrived, they had one mission: recover a stolen vehicle. They had no inkling that the car they were targeting belonged to a respected judge, a man with a spotless record and decades of public service. No one on the street knew who Marcus was. To the responding officers, the name on the report and the vehicle's description were all that mattered. And when they pulled up, Marcus was already outside his car, keys in hand, ready to go about his day. Yet, rather than taking a moment to verify the information, to double-check the license plate, to ensure they were actually dealing with the correct vehicle, the officers moved immediately into confrontation. There was no conversation, no calm inquiry, just a rapid escalation fueled by assumption and protocol applied without context. One officer yelled, one pushed, and Marcus was suddenly thrust into a nightmare scenario that should never have occurred. There was no real evidence linking Marcus to the alleged stolen vehicle. There was nothing concrete, no report tying him to criminal activity, no witness statements, no ongoing investigation indicating wrongdoing. All that existed was an error on paper and a rush to act as if the report were gospel truth. The officers did not ask questions. They did not pause to consider that the information could be wrong. They didn't check the registration, verify ownership, or consult their databases carefully. Instead, force became the first step. Officer Cross's aggression overtook reason. Marcus's protests, his calm insistence that this was his vehicle, went unheard. Every attempt to clarify, every explanation he offered, was met with louder commands, more force, and escalating tension. The second officer's fisheye camera captured every moment, showing a man who had broken no law being treated as if he were a dangerous criminal. It was a textbook example of how a small mistake, a single wrong report, can turn into a major violation of rights when authority is applied without accountability. The system, designed to protect citizens and prevent crime, had failed. Marcus Hill, a man trained in law, a judge who understood procedure better than most, found himself at the mercy of officers unwilling to pause and verify the facts. And that's the cruel irony of the moment. This wasn't a case of rebellion, resistance, or criminal behavior. It was a situation born entirely from error, compounded by impatience and a willingness to resort to force rather than reason. Marcus's vehicle had been misreported as stolen, but the response treated him as guilty before investigation, and that presumption of guilt would shape the encounter from the very first second. By the time the cuffs were applied, the mistake had already transformed into a full-blown violation. The officer's refusal to investigate further, to even glance at the facts, made the incident not just a misunderstanding, but an abuse of authority. Marcus Hill had done nothing wrong, yet he was being processed, accused, and humiliated as if he were the perpetrator. The door to reason had been closed, replaced by a rush to judgment, and every frame of the body cam would later show the stark reality. This was not law enforcement at its best. It was power unchecked, protocol misapplied, and a citizen's rights trampled due to a single, preventable error. The moment crossed a line. Officer Cross's patience, if it had ever existed, evaporated completely. His voice erupted again, sharp, commanding, and impossible to ignore. "Get on the ground. Hands behind your back." Every syllable was a demand, every word an assertion of authority, delivered without pause, without reason, without concern for truth. Marcus Hill, still trying to process what was happening, raised his hands slightly, not in resistance, but in an attempt to show compliance while he demanded clarity. "Sir, I need to know why I'm being arrested. This is my vehicle. You have the wrong person," Marcus shouted, voice strained but resolute, projecting both anger and disbelief. His words were calm compared to the explosive energy coming from Cross, yet they fell on deaf ears. Cross stepped closer, pushing Hill against the car with such force that the metal creaked under the impact, his chest pressing into Hill's back, the smell of sweat and tension thick in the air. The second officer, Officer Natalie Moore, remained nearby, her body rigid, silent, her hands at her sides. She watched as her colleague escalated, every step of the interaction unfolding through the wide-angle fisheye lens of the body cam. She did nothing to intervene, not a single word, not a single gesture to stop the aggression. Her silence allowed the situation to intensify, making the confrontation appear even more one-sided and unrelenting. Cross gripped Marcus's arm tightly, twisting it behind his back, attempting to force the handcuffs into position. "Stop talking and get your hands behind your back," he barked. The words were sharp, almost mechanical, as if rehearsed, as if the notion of explanation had no place here. Marcus, though under pressure, continued to speak, his voice rising over the chaos, insisting on his rights. "I am not resisting. I want to see a warrant. You're making a mistake." The struggle was entirely verbal and psychological. Marcus never touched the officer, never struck out, never attempted to flee. He simply asserted his rights, demanded clarity, and resisted the assumption of guilt imposed on him. Yet, to Officer Cross, Hill's insistence was interpreted as defiance, justification for escalating the physicality. With every passing second, the tension increased. The shoving became firmer, the commands louder, the aggressive positioning more calculated. The fisheye lens captured the full imbalance of power, the distortion emphasizing the pressure of the encounter, the way the officer dominated the frame while Marcus's figure appeared smaller, cornered. Cross continued to escalate, yanking at Marcus's arms, forcing him toward the patrol car. "Hands behind your back. Now, stop resisting." The shouts echoed across the street, drawing the attention of bystanders. Some stopped to watch, some fumbled for their phones. But Hill remained focused, using his voice as his shield. Every word, every plea for clarity, contrasted sharply with the officer's physicality, making the aggression even more jarring. Every motion, every push, every command was captured with unflinching clarity by the body cam. The second officer's silence was as loud as the shouts, a passive endorsement of the unchecked force. Marcus's attempts to assert his rights became increasingly urgent. "I'm a judge. I have done nothing wrong. Show me a warrant." But these words were met with more shoving, more verbal intimidation, more force. The escalation continued until Marcus was pressed firmly against the patrol car. Cross forced the cuffs around his wrists, twisting them too tightly, eliciting a sharp inhale from Hill, yet still no physical resistance. His arms were pinned, his body controlled, and his voice, though strained, remained assertive. Every demand he made, to clarify, to see the warrant, to confirm the accusation, was ignored. The scene was raw, chaotic, and unnerving. What should have been a simple verification of facts had turned into an aggressive, unprovoked assault on a law-abiding citizen. Marcus Hill, a man whose life had been dedicated to the law, now found himself subjected to its abuse. The bodycam captured the truth, every push, every yell, every unjustified maneuver. It would later serve as evidence that the escalation had been entirely unnecessary, a display of authority untempered by reason or legality. By the time Marcus was fully handcuffed, the encounter had become a public spectacle of aggression and injustice. Officer Cross had escalated the situation far beyond what any protocol or law justified. Marcus Hill had done nothing to provoke physical force, yet he bore the brunt of it, his rights disregarded, his dignity compromised, every moment recorded by the unblinking eye of the bodycam. The message was clear. In this encounter, authority spoke louder than truth, force outweighed facts, and the law, the very law Marcus Hill had spent decades upholding, was ignored. The escalation was complete, and the incident would soon make its way from a personal violation to a national story of accountability and justice. The moment the cuffs clicked shut, the street seemed to hold its breath. Marcus Hill, a man who had spent decades enforcing the law, now found himself stripped of control, subjected to the very force he had spent his life regulating. The sound of metal snapping around his wrists resonated loudly, a sharp punctuation to the humiliation he was enduring. Onlookers had begun to gather, their murmurs growing as they witnessed the scene unfold. Whispers of disbelief, eyes widening at the sheer aggression, phones raised to capture every detail. Marcus was pressed against the patrol car, the back doors yanked open, and he was shoved inside. His protests had been calm, measured, and resolute, yet they were drowned out by the commanding shouts of Officer Cross. The onlookers could see it all, the twisting of his arms, the push into the car, the tension in his shoulders as he tried to maintain dignity under the weight of force. There was no apology, no hesitation, no acknowledgement that this man, this judge, had done nothing to justify such treatment. The act itself seemed less about enforcing the law and more about demonstrating control, a public display of power that had nothing to do with justice. Some bystanders whispered to one another, shaking their heads. Others raised their phones, capturing video and photos, sensing that what they were witnessing wasn't routine police procedure. It was something darker, something that demanded to be documented. A woman muttered, "I can't believe this is happening. He's a judge." Another man muttered in disbelief, recording the fisheye footage from a distance, his eyes glued to the commotion. The murmurs grew louder as more people realized the gravity of the scene, the injustice being played out so blatantly in broad daylight. Inside the patrol car, Marcus tried to calm his racing mind. His hands were cuffed tightly, the pressure of the metal biting into his wrists. His heart pounded, but his voice, though strained, remained firm. "I am a judge," he said, his tone a mix of disbelief and defiance. "I've done nothing wrong. This is a mistake." His words echoed against the cold metal in the interior of the patrol car, unheard by the aggressive officer who had orchestrated the arrest. Outside, Officer Cross maintained his posture, rigid and unyielding, projecting authority as if the public display of force somehow justified itself. He spoke sharply to the other officer, assigning tasks, but did not address the crowd, nor did he explain his actions to Marcus. To the onlookers, the scene was a study in imbalance, a law-abiding citizen, a judge, completely overpowered by the force of one officer's unchecked aggression. The power dynamics were unmistakable, authority dominating reason, aggression replacing inquiry. The humiliation was intensified by the presence of the crowd. Bystanders had begun to film, their whispers now audible in the background, blending with the officer's clipped commands. They watched as Marcus was guided into the car, his posture restrained by cuffs, his dignity violated in full view of everyone. The irony was inescapable. A man who had spent his career upholding justice now subjected to a process devoid of fairness, stripped of choice. His name likely whispered among the crowd as confusion and disbelief spread like wildfire. Even as the officers attempted to regain control of the narrative, Marcus's composure contrasted sharply with their aggression. He did not lash out physically, did not provoke further confrontation. Instead, he tried to assert his rights verbally, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "I demand to know the charges," he said, though the officers' responses were clipped and dismissive, emphasizing authority over explanation. Every word he spoke, every attempt to maintain his dignity, highlighted the stark contrast between the disciplined, calm judge and the volatile, unchecked force of the arresting officer. The street outside seemed almost surreal. Cars continued to pass, their drivers slowing briefly to observe the scene, some shaking their heads, some recording from their windows. Pedestrians paused, recognizing the extraordinary nature of the encounter. The power imbalance was undeniable. Marcus, restrained, calm, articulating, was entirely at the mercy of officers whose authority was wielded without accountability. The cuffs, the shoving, the shouting, every element underscored the humiliation, making it clear to anyone watching that this was not law enforcement at its best. By the time Marcus was fully inside the patrol car, the onlookers had formed a loose perimeter, some talking to one another, some filming, some simply staring in disbelief. The Bodycam, fisheye capturing the scene from Cross's perspective, documented the full scope of the event. The shouting, the aggression, the lack of explanation, the violation of rights, and the total disregard for the status and dignity of the man being arrested. This was not a private encounter. It was a public spectacle. It was a lesson in how unchecked authority, even when performed in broad daylight, could overwhelm reason and fairness. The humiliation was compounded not only by the physical restraint but by the public exposure. Every passerby, every camera, every witness a participant in the unfolding injustice. Even inside the car, Marcus Hill remained steadfast. Though physically restrained, mentally he was acutely aware of the injustice. This was more than an arrest. It was a demonstration of the imbalance of power, a violation broadcasted for the world to see, and a story that would not be forgotten. The street returned to its usual rhythm, but the echoes of the encounter lingered. The shouts, the cuffs, the injustice. Marcus Hill had been publicly humiliated, his rights disregarded, and yet his composure in the face of aggression left a stark contrast. Calm, law-abiding, dignified, facing a system that had failed him in every conceivable way. After hours of detention, the ordeal finally came to a formal end, but not in the way anyone might have expected. Marcus Hill, cuffed and shaken, was released from police custody, stepping out into the same city streets that had borne witness to his humiliation. The sun had moved across the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement, yet the gravity of what had just happened clung to him like a heavy coat. It was over, physically, but the psychological weight of the experience remained, an invisible mark that no amount of sunshine or fresh air could erase. No charges were filed. There were no formal accusations, no court summons, no legal justification beyond the vague assertion of mistaken identity offered by the department. It was a phrase so cold, so minimal, that it failed to capture the severity of what had occurred. No one acknowledged that the man being held, a respected judge with decades of service, had been targeted unfairly, accused of a crime he did not commit, and publicly humiliated in front of bystanders. The words themselves, mistaken identity, rang hollow in Marcus's ears, insufficient to repair the damage done, insufficient to restore his dignity. The police department's response was mechanical and impersonal. Statements were brief, almost evasive, carefully phrased to avoid admitting any wrongdoing. There was no apology offered, no acknowledgement that the force used had been excessive, no recognition that Marcus had been entirely compliant throughout the encounter. Instead, the narrative was spun into bureaucratic neutral, an incident, a procedural error, nothing more. But to Marcus, to those who had watched it unfold, to those who would later see the bodycam footage, it was far more than a simple miscommunication. It was a violation of rights, a misuse of authority, and a public spectacle of injustice. As Marcus walked away from the station, the emotional toll began to register. Humiliation, anger, disbelief, and exhaustion collided within him. The memory of being shoved against the patrol car, the yelling of Officer Cross, the silent complicity of Officer Moore, all replayed in his mind with painful clarity. It wasn't just the physical restraint. It was the public exposure, the knowledge that people had seen him treated like a criminal, and that there had been no recourse, no immediate justice, no apology. His reputation, carefully built over decades as a judge, a public servant, and a community leader, had been questioned in a matter of minutes. He knew that even the hint of association with criminal behavior could ripple outward. Colleagues, friends, family, the public, all left to wonder about the legitimacy of his arrest before any facts were revealed. The emotional strain was compounded by the surreal juxtaposition of his role, a man whose life had been devoted to upholding the law now finding himself powerless against those sworn to enforce it. Even at home, the sense of violation lingered. Every sound in his apartment, the ring of a phone, a knock at the door, seemed amplified, a reminder of the intrusion he had suffered hours earlier. The very space that should have been a sanctuary had been infiltrated, and although the officers had not physically entered his home in this instance, the psychological imprint of the confrontation persisted. Marcus could not erase the image of the aggressive shouts, the shove, the glare of authority, nor the awareness that this could happen to anyone, regardless of status, respect, or position. Public reaction outside the immediate scene was just as chilling. Bystanders who had recorded the incident circulated the videos online, the clips spreading quickly across social media. Friends and colleagues reached out, expressing shock and anger. Some offered solace, others offered outrage. The footage provided a stark contrast to the department's claim of a simple mistake, revealing the raw aggression and the undue escalation. Marcus watched, aware that the incident would not simply disappear. The emotional and reputational toll was ongoing, and it was compounded by the knowledge that the department had no intention of acknowledging or correcting the immediate wrongs. The media, sensing the gravity of the situation, began to report on the incident, highlighting the procedural failures and the lack of accountability. Headlines questioned the judgment of the officers, the protocol of the department, and the treatment of a respected black judge. Marcus's name, once synonymous with fairness and integrity, now appeared in discussions about police misconduct and the misuse of authority. Yet through all of this, Marcus maintained his composure. He understood the stakes, the implications, and the potential fallout, but he also knew that facts and evidence would eventually speak louder than public speculation or immediate bureaucratic indifference. The bodycam footage captured everything: the aggression, the escalation, the lack of justification, and it would become the cornerstone of his pursuit of accountability. The immediate aftermath was a mixture of relief, disbelief, and lingering trauma. Marcus Hill had survived the encounter without physical injury, but the emotional bruises were deep. The humiliation of public arrest, the unchecked aggression, the absence of apology, all of it underscored the harsh reality of power imbalances in enforcement. And as the hours passed, one fact became increasingly clear. This incident was not just a personal affront. It was evidence of systemic failures that demanded correction, and Marcus was determined to see that truth brought to light. The release from custody marked the end of one chapter, but it also set the stage for the fight that would follow, a fight for justice, accountability, and recognition that no one, not even a judge, should be subjected to such treatment without recourse. The city may have let him go that day, but the story was far from over, and the consequences for those who abused their authority were only just beginning to take shape. The days following Marcus Hill's release were marked by reflection, consultation, and decisive action. While the immediate shock of the wrongful arrest had faded, the lingering sense of injustice remained. Marcus knew that what had happened to him was not just a personal violation. It was a failure of the system, a display of unchecked authority that could affect anyone if left unchallenged. He also knew that silence was not an option. The only way to seek accountability and prevent this from happening to others was to take the matter to court. Hill retained a seasoned civil rights attorney, someone well-versed in the intricacies of police misconduct cases and the legal avenues available for victims of unlawful arrests. Together, they meticulously compiled the evidence. The bodycam footage that captured every aggressive shove and shouted command, the statements from bystanders, the lack of any formal charges or written justification from the department, and the procedural failures that allowed the officers to act with impunity. Every detail was documented, every discrepancy noted, and every violation of Marcus Hill's rights became a cornerstone of the legal claim. The lawsuit was filed, citing multiple grounds: false arrest, emotional distress, abuse of authority, and violation of constitutional protections. The claim was clear and unequivocal. Marcus Hill had been detained without probable cause, subjected to an aggressive, unprovoked arrest, and publicly humiliated despite being a law-abiding citizen. The filing emphasized that the officers involved had acted recklessly, disregarding their duty to verify facts, respect individual rights, and conduct themselves professionally. As the legal proceedings progressed, the story garnered national attention. Media outlets reported on the case, highlighting the extreme contrast between Hill's calm, compliant behavior and the officers' aggressive tactics. Social media clips of the bodycam footage spread rapidly, sparking discussions on police accountability, systemic bias, and the rights of citizens, even those in positions of authority. The public discourse added pressure on the department and the city to address the incident responsibly, further amplifying the significance of the lawsuit. Throughout the legal process, Hill remained composed, determined not to let the emotional weight of the event cloud his focus. The courtroom became a platform not only for personal vindication, but for asserting the broader principle that no one, not even a distinguished judge, should be subject to arbitrary detention or abuse of authority. Expert witnesses testified on procedural standards for arrests, proper verification of reports, and the psychological impact of wrongful detentions. The bodycam footage was played in court repeatedly, each viewing reinforcing the clear mismatch between the officer's aggressive behavior and the absence of any real threat or evidence. The defense, representing the city and the police department, attempted to minimize the incident, framing it as a misunderstanding, a routine procedural response to a stolen vehicle report. They claimed that the officers had followed protocol under the circumstances. But the evidence told a different story. There was no warrant, no exigent circumstances, and the officers had escalated the situation unnecessarily, using intimidation and physical force rather than careful verification. The contrast was stark, and the jury's attention was riveted on the factual discrepancies. After weeks of testimony, cross-examination, and legal arguments, the court reached its decision. The ruling was emphatic. Marcus Hill had been wrongfully arrested, his rights had been violated, and the conduct of the officers involved was indefensible. The court awarded Hill $910,000 in damages, recognizing not only the tangible and intangible harm inflicted upon him, emotional distress, reputational damage, and public humiliation, but also the broader implications of the case for holding law enforcement accountable. The settlement was significant not only for its monetary value, but for its precedent-setting impact. It sent a clear message. Police officers cannot rely on mistaken reports to justify aggressive actions, and citizens' rights must be protected regardless of assumptions or errors. The decision underscored the principle that authority must always be exercised responsibly, with verification, professionalism, and respect for the law. Marcus Hill's victory was more than personal vindication. It was a reaffirmation of the fundamental tenets of justice. The case highlighted the importance of evidence. In this instance, the bodycam footage that clearly contradicted the officer's version of events in ensuring accountability. It demonstrated that public exposure, coupled with meticulous legal action, could compel a system to correct its mistakes and provide redress for those wronged. For Hill, the damages were not merely financial. They were symbolic, representing recognition of the wrongs he endured, validation of his rights, and a measure of accountability for those who had abused their power. The case would resonate beyond his personal story, influencing law enforcement practices, guiding procedural reforms, and reminding the public that no citizen, no matter how respected or accomplished, is immune from the protections guaranteed by law, and that justice can prevail when those protections are vigorously defended. In the end, Marcus Hill's ordeal transformed into a powerful lesson. The law protects everyone, but only when violations are challenged, evidence is preserved, and accountability is demanded. The $910,000 settlement marked closure, but more importantly, it marked a reaffirmation of rights, justice, and the principle that no one should ever face humiliation or abuse at the hands of authority without recourse.